Hello there, everybody. It's very, very nice to see folks. I am Charles Cole. I'm very, very happy to be here with you all. We have a really special show today. So welcome back to another session at Howard University. We're at the halfway mark of our 10 sessions. I want to welcome our old and new participants. You know, as always, you are free to leave comments and questions, and we'll do our best to get to it. Also, if you enjoy what you're seeing, feel free to share it so we can reach more people. And right now, we're currently streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So I'm going to bring in our people. But as I bring them in, I just want to introduce what we're actually discussing, right? As calls to defund the police begin to pick up steam, it's had an impact on what people believe is possible when it comes to archaic systems. While there have always been calls for reforming the police system or abolishing the police system, which is very different, communities of color often saw the opposite, which was more money going into law enforcement at a much higher proportion than that of social programs to aid the community. So, as always, we got Dr. Fuller to help us break that down and to kind of let us look at reform on a larger scale altogether. And we are joined by what I like to call a special guest lecturer, Artis-Wright. She's a good friend to both Dr. Fuller and I. She is brilliant. I'm just honored to serve as TA for this conversation with these people. And I'm going to let Jay introduce herself. Jay, do you want to tell these people who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate being in this space. I first and foremost need to talk about the most important thing, which is the fact that I'm a mother of three. I have three beautiful children, one that is in traditional public school system and two that are in the charter school system. And I mentioned that specifically because a lot of what I've done over the course of at least the last 10 years has been guided by me making sure that parents have the same type of opportunities to quality education that I've given to my kids and that I've had to fight for through the course of my career. But in addition to that, I'm a first generation college graduate. I was an Upward Bound student. My first job in college was working with EOP programs, so I know federal TRIO programs really well. While I was in college, I ironically learned about Prop 209, which was an initiative to basically to end affirmative action in the schools. And right now is an initiative that we're trying to repeal in the state government. But because of that, that was a catalyst for me to get involved in policy. So my senior year, going into my senior year, I met a woman by the name of Diane Watson, who's a congresswoman, and did a fellowship in Sacramento that basically sparked my career in policy and education. And I worked in policy and education for about 10 years, working in the private sector. I lobbied for different folks and always foundationally had a passion for education. And anyone who's been a first generation college graduate has kind of like this calling to make sure that other people like you have those same types of experiences. So after working in the private sector for a while, I just had this agitation to just do more and have more of an impact. And so I quit my job and traveled around the world for a little bit, and then came home back to the country and decided that I wanted to volunteer in schools. And during that time is when I found out about charter school specifically. I volunteered at a charter school in Brooklyn, New York, and just got inspired by the students. There were students in these classrooms, you know, that were coming from the projects. We took a trip to Utah one time, and you know, I was volunteering with these kids, and I remember specifically this one kid saying that he was breaking down the sedimentary rock in the wall in the formations in Utah. And our guide, who was like this younger kind of like Mormon white kid, was like, you know, just surprised that he had that type of experience in education. And it just sparked something in me, and realizing that education is something that we need to keep at the forefront of our learning and our experiences. And it just inspired me to really want to go into the route of figuring out, what was this kid learning? What was he doing that was not taking anything away from his swag and his grit, but also allowing him to be really interested in education. So because of that, I got involved in charter school work. I wanted to marry all of those experiences by talking specifically about what it was to be a parent as well. And so over the past 10 years, I've done a lot of work with training.
We're going to get there.
Okay.
Yeah. get there. It's all good. She was like, I gotta get it all out now. I'm gonna let you talk.
I know, right? Okay, we'll get there.
No, it's all good because we're gonna veer over into the space of education at some point. But I want to touch on just what's happening, right? And so, what is you all's reaction just to the traction by the movement to defund the police? And Dr. Fuller, I'm gonna throw it to you first before I go back to our illustrious guests. Like, what is this kind of, because you had a few revelations about it in the last few sessions that we had. So where are you right now?
Yeah, so I was involved in an exchange of emails with some younger people. Of course, everybody's younger than me, so it wasn't hard to find them. But and my first reaction was, that's a demand that's not feasible, and that was the wrong reaction. And so I stepped back and said, wait a minute. This may be exactly the right demand at this point in time. The question is, what does it mean? And so what I tried to do, Charles, was to go back and make sure I was clear on how did the police get started? Because one of the things that happens to us is that when we make a demand, sometimes the reaction is, well, that's a stupid demand because we've always had the police, or you got to have the police, or whatever, right? And the issue is, we didn't always, depending on who the we is, but let's say this country didn't always have the police. And if you go back and look at the history of it, it depends on where you want to start. Some people wanted to start with the day and night patrols in New York in 1845. But for me, I go back to 1712 and look at the slave patrols, because the slave patrols were really the beginning of what ultimately became a modern day police force. And initially, a lot of the police started out as a way for industrialists to control working class people who would go on strike or make other demands. And so a lot of the initial police organizations were controlled by private organizations. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying all of that to say that when people say defund the police, it could mean a number of different things. For some people, they may want to just abolish police altogether. For other people, it is, let's take some of those resources and move them over into other areas, which also would mean you would take away some of the functions. Like I was listening to, I forget, maybe it was the mayor of Atlanta or somebody the other night, and this has happened in a couple of cities and states, where the police are no longer going to be sent to domestic disputes, for example, and other kinds of calls that really don't require a police force. Mm-hmm. And so people are trying to rethink not the issue of, do you need public safety? Because you do. The question is, what form should it take? And should the current way that the police is organized, is that the only way for the public to be safe? Because clearly, the police department right now is not a place of public safety for Black people, mm-hmm. in the sense that they're killing us, and they've been killing us. And I'm sitting here, as you know, still like enraged because Mr. Floyd was killed with the same knee on his neck that Ernest Lacy was killed in 1981, mm-hmm. when I co-led Justice for Ernest Lacy. So the main point I'm trying to make here is, before we just dismiss the cause for defunding the police, it's helpful to step back and say, what is the function of a police in our society? How did it get started? And what is it that we actually need in order to be safe, but at the same time, to be safe from them? Mm-hmm. And so what I would do would be to urge people to look at that. And if I could just take a minute, Charles, because I see a lot of similarities between the teachers union and the police union. And so one of the examples is that whenever you oppose teacher unions, the first thing they say to you is, you're against public education. If you oppose the police union, you're against public safety. And so the assumption is that the delivery system is in fact the essence of what you're saying. And what I mean by that, and I've said this over and over again, public education is an idea. the Newark public school system or the Oakland public school system or the Milwaukee public school system, it's not public education. It's a delivery system for public education. And since it wasn't created by God, you could change it. And so that if you say, I want to change this, it doesn't mean you are opposed to public education. What you're opposed to is the system that got structured to deliver public education, which does not work for large numbers of our kids. So if you look at police, you would say, we want public safety, but we shouldn't assume that the only way to have, quote, public safety is to have the entity that we currently have. We could look at that entity and develop different ways of making sure the public was safe. Because when I look at it, man, I'm looking at, you have an organized group, the teachers union, that has for years been killing our children's minds. We got an organized entity, the police union, who represent people who've been killing us literally. And so when you look at those two things, it makes no sense at this moment in history to be moderate. This is the moment in time to put forth the boldest possible ideas that you have. Moderation right now at this moment in history is a sin. And it should not be tolerated. So I'm out there saying to the people who are out in the street, and to me, they're the ones who are creating this situation. I want to hear what you all have to say. And I hope you will continue to push the most radical ideas possible. And then the rest of us need to try to really understand it and figure out how to be supportive.
Wow. That was a lot. I think that's a strong feeling. I mean, I agree with them. I think that you've alluded to this a little bit. I'll give my thoughts. I want to go to our guests. What are your thoughts, Jay, on what you're seeing right now with this movement around, defunding the police?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing that first comes to mind to me is the fact that police officers are policy implementers, the same way that teachers are policy implementers, right? So there's different systems of policy. There's the agenda setting. There is, the ability to formulate policy. There is, being able to be an evaluator, and then there's implementers. So as much as we are trying, or as much as you hear rhetoric around police reform, there also needs to be a larger conversation about who put those police in those positions, who trained those police, who allowed those police to operate based off of the regulations that they have to enlist some of the forceful tactics that they've done. And so we can't separate the conversation from just talking about police reform and the actions of these police officers, because quite frankly, there was a police officer who was trained, who was told how to discharge his gun, who was told how to subdue, a person and handcuff them. And those are larger conversations that we also have to include in the whole discussion. Because when you start breaking down the systems of policy, you understand that there are elected officials that are in office. There are chiefs of police who actually, hired these people. There are, like I said, there's a whole system of people who set agendas of how these police operate that involve being elected into office, being someone in a municipality that has the power to hire and fire these people. And then the other part of that is the special interest group, which is what Dr. Fuller was talking about, which is, people like the union reps who basically go to these elected officials and they determine and try to set an agenda for what they feel like should be enforced. So we have to look at the system as a whole and be able to not only reform the police work, but also be able to reform and reshift the power. And just to draw a parallel to, this conversation about police reform and how it plays out. So here are the similarities between police and the teachers union, right? Both have really powerful, deep pockets, right? They have deep pockets. They are funded with an agenda. They are organized, and they write checks to elected officials to get them into office. It is a part of their formula. And based off of that, they build power. And one thing that I want to do is I feel somewhat hesitant to no one's attacking the police or the teachers directly, but we're talking about the systems that they operate within that we know are systemically racist and that we know are continue to be perpetuated because they get agency over those things through the policy and the procedures that happen to get them into office, to get them in their positions. So it's a broader conversation than just, we have to target the police reform. We have to, the discussion about defunding the police is a matter of shifting the funds, right? We spend more money on police power and police tactics than we do on social working, for example. Like the police budget is immense. The teachers union's budget is immense. And so the way that we talk about defunding, it should be more of like how we refund or reshift or reassign those funds to actually do things that are actually helpful and positive. Take the police funding budget and put it more to social work and wraparound services that we know we need in the schools for our kids. Things like that are the things that we should be talking about.
That's what's up. So I appreciate that. And I think if I'm gonna answer that question, one is really hard to follow both of you up. I think y'all gave some amazing answers. And I think the people that's listening actually agree, because I see a lot of comments. See, like Chanel says, she loves this panel.
Hey,
Chanel, right?
So here are my thoughts on it. My thoughts on what I'm seeing right now with the police is hopeful. And there's two lessons that I learned from it. One, what we thought was impossible to do, which was like really rethink what this apparatus could look like, is actually happening. And I think that it's giving people a lot of hope. And I think that you will start to see people look at other sectors that looked immovable before, education being one of them. Two, messaging is really important. And one of the biggest things that I've seen on the timeline, especially from folks that disagree with the defunding of the police, is that I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to actually defund versus abolish. There's a difference. And now both of these campaigns are getting steam. In my opinion, I don't know how much abolish will get, but I do see defunding getting a lot of steam. Defunding doesn't mean to shut down. What it means is to look at the areas in which folks are operating and divert funds from there to other places, right? So for instance, I was a social worker for 5 years. We did some of our trainings together because I usually was the person that was called in to de-escalate a situation with a young person that might have Asperger's or autism, but has been physical before, right? Now, I'm trained to de-escalate that situation. A cop is not trained for that. A cop's job in that moment is to neutralize a situation, right? There's a very big difference. And I had some really big boys on my caseload that were like 15 years old, but like 300 pounds, right? So defunding is saying, hey, who's better suited to do this? Let's actually put funds there while you allow police officers to go and do their job. Abolish is getting rid of. And I think that what it makes me understand as somebody who does this kind of reform work on the education side is the words that we use are really, really, really important. And as we kind of segue, and y'all did a good job of connecting this to education, I'm not a person that says school choice, right? I know what school choice means because I'm in it, right? I say parent choice or community choice because it has a different connotation for people. And that other term has been so bastardized, right? So we should actually be taking this moment as a lesson because I think people are spending more time explaining what defund the police are as opposed to being able to work on the work of defunding the police. But I want to, since y'all had that perfect segue, Jay, and I'll start with you. How do you think folks should be thinking about reform at a time like this? And I'll come and Dr. Fuller, you can hop in. We're all friends, so we're in this stage where we can jump in and out. You know what I'm saying? Y'all don't have to wait for me. So Jay, I'll let you start us off. What should folks be thinking about reform just as a whole?
Yeah, well, first thing I'll tell you, being someone who's worked in education reform and being Black, I've learned that word reform actually has a negative connotation immediately. When you say reform, people immediately think that it's something that is going to privatize or something that's going to cause some type of disruption to other people that have used used mechanisms to work for them. And what I'll say is, the way that I look at reform, it's about finding ways to innovate, finding ways to, change what we see as, the autonomy or how people operate in certain systems. And so, and actually in challenging the status quo. So that's what the word reform means to me in both cases. It's not a matter of getting rid of or eliminating, you know, we hear this a lot in the education space, right? If you're education reformer, you're trying to get rid of all traditional schools, right? Or you're trying to, again, like you're trying to privatize schools and change the way they work. But the reality is that the way that they've worked have not worked for people like me and people like us. And so there has to be a discussion about reformatting what this looks like. You know, the prefix of the word reform. How do we make this work in ways that will help us?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. You know what? I think the problem is, when is reform like a bad word, man? Not as a word, but as a strategy. Because ultimately you get into a discussion about what is the difference between reform and revolution. And so one of the things we need to understand about reform is that reform essentially assumes that the system is okay. It just needs to be modified. So if you reform it, we need to get rid of the chokehold, or we shouldn't suspend students, or, you know, we got a few bad teachers, we got a few bad cops, but many times a reformist starts with the assumption that the system is fundamentally okay. What we need to do is to modify it. What I'm saying is, it may be a bit much to talk about revolution, but could we introduce the concept of radical reform?
It's never too early in the morning to talk about revolution.
Yeah, I mean, no, but could we talk about the idea that we want to seize this time, not just to examine the policies, but we want to seize the time to examine the very philosophical foundation of the thing's existence. Because if you go there, what you ultimately could do is you might end up with a serious level of reform, but it would be a reform based on trying to establish a different philosophical foundation for its existence. Like, I see people who are posting about what happened in Camden. Mm-hmm. And in reality, what happened in Camden, if I understand it, I was actually there when some of this was occurring. It wasn't like they abolished the police. They abolished the Camden police, and then the county took over, and then they began to institute different police practices. And I'm not saying that there was anything wrong with that, but I'm just saying we shouldn't use that as an example of the abolishment of the police. It was the abolishment of the police being controlled by the city of Camden, and then the police functions were given to another structure, and that structure went about trying to have policing be different. We've heard, look, you hear about community policing, you hear about all these different ideas, and I'm not saying none of these ideas have merit. What I'm saying, though, is this a moment in time to think deeper than just here's a policy change that we need to make? Mm-hmm. I mean, can we stop and say, if you need public safety, what is the best form to do that? And we shouldn't assume that just some modification of the existing police department is the way to have that discussion. Now, you could end up there, but so let me state it this way, and let me stop. So this country was founded on a revolution. And what the founding fathers did was to say, we got to make sure we set up a structure that won't let nobody have a revolution against us, right? So the idea was to create all of these, quotes, checks and balances. But what all that really is a way to make sure radical change cannot take place. That the only way to change something is it'll take 40 years. Or, your children will be in charge by the time you get a small change in the police department. And so what I'm saying is this what when people say this is an inflection moment, what does that mean? And to me, what it means is you want to examine the very nature of a structure and why it exists the way that it does. And if you're not doing that, then we're missing this moment, at least in my opinion.
I'm with both of you. I think, both of these systems have deeply impacted and affected me on a personal level. Like, I was the kid, I did what I was supposed to do. I had good grades. I remember getting pulled over and being told to get out of my car and to dump out my trunk because a 7-Eleven had gotten like robbed, and I didn't even fit that description. But like, you know, man, these cats put their guns on my neck. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like 20 years old. And I've been, you know, like cuffed and like sat on like a curb, and I'm like, yo, I'm in college with a 3.8 GPA. Like damn, none of this like protect you. And the education side, it's this system has never worked for Black and brown kids, especially if you poor. And it's so backwards, in fact, that my mother was told that she would get arrested if she put me in a school by lying about her address. So when we talk about reform, I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Fuller. Reform is okay when these things don't threaten my life. I'm beyond reform on both of these systems, right? Because that does, it gives it lets it off the hook by saying, let's reform it, because it's saying that there's something worth saving there. And I think, and personally, I don't feel like as much, listen, man, if white rich people were consistently at the bottom of every academic measurement that's negative, like, or you know what I'm saying, everyone, they would have destroyed it. It would be napalmed, man. They would bomb that thing. You know what I'm saying? But it's okay to reform it when it's them niggas over there that's being impacted, when it's the Mexicans that's being impacted, not with these white folks. You know, they were asking AOC about the police stuff, and they said, it's hard. She said, it's hard for me. Somebody asked her, and in their question, they said, it's hard for me to picture police defunded. She said, no, it's not. She said, and I don't always agree with her. We actually don't agree on a lot of stuff. But what she said was, no, she said, go to a suburb. That's what defunded police looks like. They pay less for police officers, and they pay more for sports. They pay more for social services. They pay more for parks. They pay more, like, people have jobs in those places. So when we talk about reform, especially as far as education, and for us to be, I don't do reform work. I do liberation work, right? And I think that when you say that, it sets the conversation up in a different way. So, you know, I know you asked if it was too early to talk about revolution, but
yeah, but
yeah, you know,
yeah, but Charles, look, if you say, I'm going to build a society, and I'm going to build into the society inequity. If you say, I'm going to structure a society, and race is going to be one of the building blocks for the nature of the inequity. If you say that, then what you also got to say is, you know, they're going to erupt at some point. Right. So what I got to do is I have to build in something to deal with the eruption, right? So when I was in graduate school, I read this article where Frank Reisman talked about dirty workers. And essentially what he was saying was that we hire a group of people in this country to keep us away from them. And so the police are now saying, hey, man, like, why y'all mad? We doing what y'all told us to do. It isn't like we're performing some function that nobody knew about. What's now happening is, because y'all got all these cameras and cell phones and this and that, all of this stuff that we've been doing forever is now public. But why y'all mad? Because this is what we were supposed to do. And that's why, Charles,
say that part one more time, and I'm gonna go to Jay, because go ahead. Oh, no, say that last part one more time, and then
no. I'm just saying the built-in inequity in the society means that you have to have an armed force, because at some point in time, the people are going to erupt. So if you read Black Reconstruction by Du Bois, and he was talking about this in chapter 6, he was talking about how after Black people were free, that there were Southern papers talking about the fact that the state militia was at freed Black people in such a way, at such a level of oppression, that they said, if we continue along this path, at some point, there's going to be an insurrection. Because when you continue to oppress people in this way, at a certain moment in time, being pacified or being quiet is no longer a virtue. This was said by Du Bois in 1935, talking about what was happening to us in 1867.
I think that's powerful. Jay, you're about to hop in. Go right ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I was just saying, I mean, to this point about him talking about that police are like, why are you upset with what we are doing? It was to my whole point about the fact that they are trained to operate that way. They, like I said, there is a system that is perpetuated to allow them to operate in those ways, the same way that we see within the education structure. I mean, the same way we look at police reform and look at driving while black is the same way we can look at teacher education and talk about school to prison pipelines. They're the same types of dynamics of people who are part of a systemic racist system that we are supposed to buy into, that does not work for us, that was never set up to work for us, first of all. And it's interesting, right? Because I'm sitting here listening to us talking, and Dr. Fuller, you sent me, and that I think you sent it to a bunch of us, the last sermon of Dr. King, and how he was talking about, basically where he was at that time in society, how moderates basically needed to step up. You mentioned that as well. Like, the biggest sin right now is the fact that we have so-called allies that are saying, what can we do to help? How can we get engaged? And I appreciate the fact that so many people, black, white, or otherwise, want to get involved. But what often happens is that you want to take ownership and control of how to get involved. And so in the same, when I was listening to Dr. King's speech, like two things resonated with me. One of it was the fact that we are still living in a time where, as Black people, it's like we have to get a nod or permission from white people to be able to take ownership of what we know is best for us. And at the same time, it bothers me as a Black person to feel like I have to have permission to talk about what I know is inherently mine or rightfully mine by the basis of my DNA. And let me explain a little bit further. Like, I love I love everybody, white, brown, whatever. I love you all. But there is no other person in this country, in the United States of America, that was enslaved. Black people were enslaved in this country. And even once we were emancipated, based off of, we know the history, the doors were open and we were said to let go, but we weren't given any tools to set ourselves up for success at all. And so all of that had to be something that we devised for ourselves. And it came from trial and error. It came from being able to utilize the help and support of other people. But I feel like that constantly gets lost in the conversation. And I always talk to parents and to youth about what is embedded in our DNA, because we literally had nothing and built greatness out of nothing, based off of our ability to know what was right for us and what we deserved. And so I don't try to mince words when I talk about how important this is to Black people. A lot of times we start talking about stuff that is directly affecting us. People are like, oh, well, you guys are also being racist. It's not a matter of me being racist. I'm telling you something, that there was a system set up from the beginning that did not want me to prevail. And that's why it's important for me to talk about this from my perspective, from my authentication of understanding what it means to be Black in this country.
But Jay, and Charles, I want to say something here too. It isn't just that the system wasn't set up to work for us. The system was set up to crush us. I mean, the system was set up specifically to oppress us, which is a different thing, right? Because, oh, well, this don't work for us. No, it isn't just that it don't work for us. It's like coming at us like every single day, man. I mean, the fact that you have to have a discussion with your children about what you're supposed to do when you leave this door, and when you walk out, think of all of the Black parents who's scared every time their children leave home. Why is that? Why should you feel that way in America? Because you know that you could get killed for the only reason you're getting killed is because you're Black. And what that does is it gets to the fact that there's never been a belief in our humanity. You can't put your knee on a man's neck
for 8 minutes.
8 minutes and 42 seconds or whatever it is.
What to do?
It's him as a human being.
But it's physically discomfortable to do. Like, you can't even do it for that long, like, without hurting yourself. Like, that's how much, like, that's how dehumanized that person was. I mean, we got this piece, and I'll I'll answer that as I segue into this part, right? What does it mean to be a professional in this work? I want to just kind of say, like, sometimes your skeletons come back, right? When you build systems, when any empire that builds a system, they reign for a minute and then something happens, right? Like those people that you built it on figure out a way to rise up. So we talking about two systems. Listen, man, both my parents were jailbirds. Both my parents were addicts, homeless, 4 shelters, 11 elementary schools where most of the Black kids around me couldn't read. When I got to Oakland, they were talking about putting me in special ed. Then I read out loud and I ended up in the GATE program. This happened in the course of 1 week. This is how flippant this system is, man. To now being a college graduate, a doctorate, and having my own company and doing this stuff. Listen, man, I don't care about what you feel as a reform movement, reform, or whatever the term is. I am America's reckoning, man. Like you have somebody like me. I am here with messed up hair, with gold teeth and a beanie on, right? Running my own company, right? Because I want to be able to do and say what the fuck I want to say and do. And the reason, and excuse my language, but it's important because you can only treat people a certain type of way for so long and hit them for so long, right? I wrote a manifesto, man. I wrote a manifesto about if I die. Like we talked about that on this show, Howard, you know what I'm saying? Like that is where people, I saw women today that wrote about, I'm not suicidal. I'd never hang myself. This is the mode that people are in. Sometimes systems get what they deserve. Sometimes reckonings happen. Sometimes you are born in the middle of slavery, but sometimes you're born at the tail end when they start cutting folks' heads off. Now, I'm not saying nothing about violence or anything like that, but you have a generation filled with people like me and you and the spirit of what y'all have done, and they don't have mercy. They not here to negotiate. They're not here to make friends. They're not here to bake fucking pies and cookies. They are here to be America's reckoning. So what does it mean for me to work in the reform movement as a Black professional? I wanted to build my own lane and do it my way and say what I wanted to say. If you want to call names, if you want to play these politics games, I ain't got to be friends with none of y'all. And I'm not one of them people that you can come up in me and put your finger in my face. Listen, man. And I'm gonna just be very real right now. Can I be very real? And then I'm gonna pass it to y'all and go back to TA mode. I already assume white folks gonna take everything I got. So I'm all about agency, baby. If I'm gonna lose it all, I'd rather lose it on my own terms. Don't be the reason I lose everything I got. Because if you come at me and you put your finger in my face, I'm firing on you. And I'm just telling you for me. I'm not talking for Dr. Fuller or Jay. I'm not saying that people should be violent. I'm not saying that I'm telling people to go out there and be violent. But what I'm saying is, at some point, people get tired of turning them cheeks, man. These cheeks they hurt. They swollen. So that what it means to me to be a Black professional in this space is I have some agency to do and say and research and operate the way that I want to do it. And if folks don't like it, then kick rocks. But Dr. Fuller, for you, what does it mean for you to be?
After all of that, Dr. Fuller, go on. I need you to breathe, Charles. It's okay. You need a hug. Too bad we're not all together. You need a hug.
Well, the first thing is you got to give Charles a promotion.
It's that rage. It's that rage.
Right? He can't remain a TA. We got to make him like a co-professor. There's no TA function for him. Okay, but I'd be interested in what you all think about this. I talk about this all the time. If you're a Black person, if you read Black Rage, I think James Baldwin was quoted in there and said, if you're a Black person and you're even relatively conscious, you ought to be in a constant state of rage.
Rage, yep.
That's me, like a constant state of rage. And you have to continue to negotiate that rage on a given day. And so the problem is for those of us who are, quote, professionals, the question is, how do you earn a living and at the same time not betray your people in the process of earning a living? And so the only way to do that is you have to make these compromises. And the struggle is, are you compromising on principle or are you compromising on strategy and tactics? Because no matter what it is we sit up here and say, if you got kids, you got a family, you got to take care of that family. And you're going to have to be employed, self-employed. You're going to have to do something to bring in money. And if you're not able to, like employ yourself, then what you got to do is you got to be out there trying to raise money. You got to deal with white people who, some of them are John Brown and some of them are somebody else. So what I'm trying to say is it is exhausting to be, quote, a Black professional in America if you actually care about Black people. Because let's be clear, we have some of us whose main concern is our brand. It ain't our people, it's our brand. And I'm not saying that your brand is not important if your brand helps you help our people. But for some of you, your brand is more important than helping our people. And so when you start talking about being a Black professional, Amilcar Cabral wrote this book called Return to the Source. And he said, what is the role of a petty bourgeois intellectual of an oppressed people? And that's us. Those of us who got these degrees and, you know, got all this stuff, we come from an oppressed people. The question is, what is your role as an intelligentsia of an oppressed people? Is it to add to the oppression of our people, or is it to use your intellect and whatever capacity you have to try to make a significant difference for those amongst us who have the least? And we all need to be asking ourselves that, because when we roll up into these places every day, the question is, on this day, are you helping our people or hurting our people? Yep. And you have to be conscious. You can't operate like, oh, I didn't know. Hell no. You know, every day you walk into these places, you know whether the decision you are making is helping our people or hurting our people. And quit lying to yourself about which one you're doing on a given day.
Jay, same question for you. And Dr. Fuller, that was fire, brother. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You know, I'm a little bit more calm than y'all are. Well, y'all on fire right now. But you know what, though, real talk, I have to be calm because, quite frankly, me, like most Black professionals, have to, you know, regain ourselves and recompose ourselves because of that rage that you just talked about. The reality is, as a Black professional, it is exhausting. It is racial fatigue at times. I am a vice president of a trade association where I am considered, you know, a senior level employee. I'm only one of 4 in my entire organization. And as much as I know people are trying to, that I work within an organization that is trying its best to do well, the attempts to do well sometimes are annoying as hell. Like recently with the situation that happened, and I know we can all attest to this, I don't want to be your Black voice. I don't want to be able to get you to understand how I'm feeling. And even more so, don't read a book about it. I need you to live it with me. You know, there's this whole conversation in the DEI world about, you know, whether you're going to be an ally or an accomplice. Like if you are walking in this space, and I can only speak to education because I work in the education space. If you are an educational professional and you went to a privileged school, had an Ivy League education, and you decide to come into this space of education, and you don't understand that the students and the parents and the grandparents and the communities that you serve come from a different perspective than you, you are not qualified to some degree, in my opinion, to be able to have conversations or to be leading organizations where that is the agenda. And for me, it's been really difficult because I took a career transition. About 10 years ago, I left the private sector. I was lobbying for an entertainment industry. I left that sector because I was specifically intentional about wanting to work with people that look like me. While I was working in the private sector, I was alone. I was one of a few. And so everyone knows that even in a situation where you're supposed to make it or arrive, is lonely because you're the only person there and you got to stand there by yourself and be validated or stigmatized based off of what other people do. And there's that fatigue that comes with that. I didn't want to work in an environment like that. So I stepped away from that. And I transitioned to work in an environment where, one, I felt like there was influence. I'd have influence around what was happening, that there was autonomy, where I could actually have impact and change in what I was doing. And for me, that was working in the education sector, and specifically being able to tie my policy work into what I saw as being positive movements forward for Black folks in education. So, I mentioned earlier about working in charter schools. I work in charter schools because for me, that has been in my opinion, the way that we can progress forward. Charter schools have had the opportunity to have autonomy and innovation and utilize equity in the sense of being able to make sure that we move forward in advancing a systemic education structure that never worked for people like me. At the same time, there are charter school leaders who do not understand the power of being a Black person, a Black parent, a Black staffer in the organization that you are trying to run. And I have tried to be the voice to be able to say, wait a minute, before you put down this parent or believe that this parent or this student can't learn because you think you fundamentally understand this because you read this with your Ivy League education, understand that whatever you read in your education, these people are living every day. And so sometimes people like me have to be in those spaces to remind, like Dr. Fuller said, those bourgeoisie folks, that you don't necessarily have this figured out. And so a big part of why I do what I do is based on understanding one fundamental principle that my parents taught me. Just like you, Charles, there were times in my life where I was homeless. Like I literally was sleeping in a car, and I would look forward every morning to that free and reduced lunch breakfast where I could go to school and get that hot, crumb cake and that milk, because I know that fed my soul. At the same time, my parents told me every day, you are better than your surroundings. You are going to be more than what people are telling you that you are. And I don't feel like the people that at one point when I, had lived in different places, I don't think they heard that same message. And so every time I come into the space as a Black professional, I fundamentally know where my DNA comes from. I know how powerful that I am. I know how powerful I am to walk into spaces and change the environments that I'm around. But what I need to do is have my white allies and my white accomplices move out the way and allow me to walk into my greatness. And sometimes what happens is that we have people that don't want to do that because they feel like they know better than we know for ourselves. I don't believe that.
Y'all are amazing right now. I just want to just say y'all are amazing. I can't even get through all the comments fast enough. And I know there are questions there that we're not able to get to, but keep sending them. We got them, and I'll make sure they get addressed in some form or fashion. I think, but that takes us to one of our last questions, and I'll segue, my piece into that, and that's around how do Black folks build power. And, I'm gonna steal from the great Jay-Z, Jay-Z Carter, who on his song Show You How to Do This, where he instructed a young lady to put a little in the bag and put a little in the purse. And what I mean by that is, as somebody who grew up where poverty is a real thing, right? Like, listen, there are folks that's rich, Black, most of them end up being white though, but we're not Black, where they can just quit their jobs and just go find themselves and figure this stuff out. I'm not telling you to do that around Black power, right? Because it's hard when you can't provide toys for your kids on Christmas, when you can't feed them, when you don't have a place for them to live. You know what I'm saying? People gonna show up differently in the grasp of power. Some folks are going to be able to build their own stuff out and kind of say what they need to say. But then there are some folks that need to be in those systems kind of on the inside, like giving us the information that we need and pushing people or doing whatever, and I look at somebody like Fuller when I talk about power, right? And I think about how long he's been doing this. When we did that last show and he was just like, man, I went through this in 1981. And this is what these jokers said about me. And this is what they did. And that we doing this again in 2020. And that's hard, right? That's hard. And so when you said that, Fuller, it makes me think about Booker T. Washington, a book that you made me read and I read with a group. Yeah. A lot of people call Booker T. Washington a Tom, or they get mad and say he was a sellout. Man, Booker T. Washington was somebody who lived in slavery and then was free and finagled these white people and saying, look, we only going to do industrial work. I just need you to help me build all the schools. Black people out right after slavery are the reason you even have free public education in the South. And people to this day are trying to talk about who that man is. So when we talk about power, there's sacrifices that have to be made. There's people who are going to get called out their name. And then there's some people that's going to die. Like there's some people that's going to die, man. Like, you know what I mean? Like when we look at that work that happened in Ferguson, you know, most of them, like a lot of those kids that led that work, they're dead. They just died. I don't know how a random group of 6 or 7 people just actually died. Oh yeah, I do. You know why? Because just in the past few weeks, we had 5 Black people commit suicide by hanging. Like, this the time we live in, man. It sounds like 1920. So when I talk about suggestions for Black power, what I'm saying is this: figure out a strategy and have some discipline around that strategy. You got to stick with it. And there's going to be some losses in that place. And you got to determine for yourself what you willing to lose and the role that you willing to play. We all don't have to play the same role, but you got to play a role. And when you don't play a role, that's still playing a role. You just might be playing for the other team. So I will leave it to you all to be a bit more elegant on that space than I am. We'll start with Jay this time, and then Fuller, you'll follow up. Jay, what suggestions do you have for how we build power?
Well, first, I want to reflect back to what you said about Booker T. Washington, because I don't think a lot of people even understand the impact that occurs from Booker T. Washington. First of all, Booker T. Washington started Tuskegee University. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Lewis Adam, a former slave man, a former slave, started Tuskegee University. And he hired Booker T. Washington to be the principal. And here's the interesting thing about Lewis Adams. Lewis Adams had no formal education. He was a community leader. He was a craftsman, and he was skilled. And because he was a community leader, a man by the name of W.F. Foster, who was a politician, came to Lewis Adams and asked him, how can I get, and this is ironic, right? How can I get the Black vote in your community? How can I get African Americans to vote on my behalf in your community? Can you help me do that? And Lewis Adams said, I'm going to help you do that, but I don't want you to pay me. I want you to build me a school. I want to have a school. And so he could have easily asked for money. He could have asked to set himself up. But this slave man decided he wanted to build a school, an education structure. And then Booker T. Washington became the president of Tuskegee University. And the amazing thing that we miss about Booker T. Washington, that a lot of people don't know, Booker T. Washington graduated and educated more self-made millionaires in Harvard University. He literally, the president of Harvard University, came back several times to Tuskegee School to find out what was the secret sauce of what you guys were doing within this university that were literally compelling Blacks who had nothing to now come back and be self-made millionaires. And a lot of that was based off of understanding your power dynamics and knowing what it takes in order for you to be able to be free. It's not just a matter of someone opening the doors and saying you are free. It is a mindset shift. It is a matter of understanding how power comes into play. It is a matter of understanding how you utilize the tools that set this country up to get what you need. And for me, those tools are being able to look at education. It's also being able to understand that politics have a huge factor in how we've been able to even advance. You know, everything that we've done as Black people in this country nothing has been given to us. Everything has had to be voted on to be given to us. The Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil Rights Movement, you know, even the Early Secondary Education Act, for us to even go to colleges to get student loans, all of that had to be voted on by somebody. Politicians who sat in office and made decisions. And the thing is, when we relate it back to the unions, they know that. So that's why they deploy so much interest and so much investment in influencing politicians, because they know that the decisions that are being made by how we operate every day are based on some policy decision. Mm-hmm. So Black power and building power is being able to understand that the first and primary source of your power is being educated, educating yourself to the best of your abilities and educating your family. And the second thing is being able to understand that you have agency and access of that. Like, our power is our people and our ability to commune with each other. The same thing Lewis Adam knew about setting up Tuskegee University. You know, when we look at us as individuals, Black people are operated, we all go to church, we all come from a church background. That's our faith, whether you believe in the building itself or just the spirituality of faith. Faith gives you the appeal that there's something better for you. And so those are fundamental principles that we have to operate on. We have to have faith. We have to have political agency. We have to be able to understand how important education is. And we have to have power within that educational structure to make sure that we are making the decisions for us. So like Dr. Fuller and I have started working with a couple of other charter school leaders that are Black and brown people of color for the Freedom Coalition, right? The main point of that was to talk about the fact how important it is for Black school leaders to be able to have agency over making sure that we educate our kids in the right way, period. That's what it's about. And so those are the fundamental principles for me, and being able to understand how we link those together and how those are tied to our ability to advance.
That was a great answer. How about you, Dr. Fuller?
Yeah, a couple of things. Like if you're going to study Booker T, you also have to read the composition speech, the Atlanta composition speech.
I definitely read that. We read that. We all read it as part of the book club.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that, again, it gets into that point I was making about the contradictions and which ones are you willing to live with. And because no matter what we do, since we don't control the society, whatever we do, there's going to be an upside and a downside. And each of us has to deal with whether or not we think the upside outweighs the downside. So Booker T had to deal with, I'm trying to do X, but in order to do X, I got to say some things that these white people are okay with in order to get resources to do that. And all I'm saying is that when we examine anybody, we need to examine all aspects of that person and make a judgment at the particular moment in history that they were functioning. So but let me just speak to this power thing, because I think there's different types of power.
Absolutely.
Right? There's intellectual power, there's economic power, there's political power. There's all these different
power.
Yeah, I mean, there's but here's the thing I would argue. I would say to those of us who care about Black people, what power do you have? What is your best way to contribute to our people? Is it by writing articles? Is it by working on policy? Is it by starting a school, starting a business? What is it? But what I would say is that if you're working for the people, the commonality is going to be whatever is your power source. You're using that power source not just for your own individual aggrandizement. You're going to use that power source to try to advance the interests of our people, and particularly our people who have the least in this society. And so, people ask me these days, what should I do? And my question is, what are you able to do? What is it that you can actually do? Well, I'm not good at leading demonstrations. Fine. What are you good at? Tell me the thing that you're good at. And then the question is, if you know what that is, then my next question is, how are you using that to help our people at this moment in history? And so, Charles and Jay, that's how I look at the issue of power, right? It's what is your area, and then how are you using whatever that is? And the one thing that we all have to struggle with, some of us are just happy to be invited into the room. We happy. Oh, these white people invited me in there. And so you ain't gonna say nothing because you want to keep being invited back. So my point is, if you in there and you ain't saying nothing that's in the interest of our people, your being there is irrelevant. And so whatever, quote, power you have, because for some of us, we think the power is the fact that they keep asking us to come in the room. No, the power is when you get in the room, do you do anything to advance the interests of our people, even if it means you'll never be invited back to that room again? Because many of us assume that the most important thing is for me to keep being invited. I'm saying no. The most important thing is for you to do something when you're in the room, to exercise whatever power you have when you're in the room, even if it means you'll never be in that room again.
And you know what, I want to add to that, and that you aren't the only one in the room. I think it's important that we understand that we have collective power to operate, you know, together as a community that we don't leverage enough. As a manager of anybody, whether they look like me or not, it is my role to be able to advance whatever I'm trying to do and bring people along with me. I don't feel comfortable being in a situation where I am one of few. The fact that in the 21st century, we're still talking about being the first African-American to do this, the first woman to do that, that's problematic for me. I want to operate in a sense where if you don't know what your purpose is, if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, I want to work with people that are going to train you and teach you how to do better. And so that's the other part about this dynamic with people who want to help. If you want to help, and you know that someone look to coaching and training and developing other people, because not all of us, we got a lot of baggage, a lot of stuff that we hold internally. Not a lot of us know how magnificent we are. We all operate with our own fears and our own insecurities. But one thing that could be helpful is allowing people to understand how they come into this, how they come into this work, and training them and developing them to be better. I say this specifically, again, to the field that I work in. A lot of times we have these parent trainings, and we work with other folks, parents specifically, right? And the whole idea is that we want to work with them so that they can help advocate for us. But how about advocating for them? If any parent that I've ever worked with over the course of my profession, I've always told them, however you come into this space is not how you're going to leave out of it. If you come in as a parent, you're going to leave out as an elected official, or you're going to leave out as the principal. Like, there is more to be gained from how you come in and how you leave. And so we have to cultivate that in the way we think about doing this work. And at this point, it is not enough for us to be the only ones in that space. We have to bring other folks along with us as well.
I mean, it's nice if you can, right? Like, somebody just makes that point about Booker T. Like, he couldn't, right? He was the only one there. But when it wasn't just the universities that he built he built the black schools, the black, like free public schools in the South. And then the white folks said, oh, at first they didn't want those schools. And then they saw black folks learn, and they said, well, we want that money for our kids, and we're going to take over that curriculum. But he knew, listen, man, we've always had invisible institutions. I wrote about it. It's in my book. And I talked about, and even in slavery times and before slavery, because our history starts way before slavery. But in slavery times, we had information and learning sessions in the middle of church with white overseers there. Like, we learn how to speak in code in churches, right? And even when he built those schools, he had some faith that, these black folks that I get into these schools to teach, if I get them built, they'll be able to turn into what it needs to be. I know we need to close. I want to give you all, time for your final thoughts. It's not TV, so we don't have to cut right at the hour. But I want to be cognizant of both of your schedules, because I know y'all are busy. So Jay, as our guest, can you briefly give us your final thought?
Briefly, the key word there, right?
I don't want to be the reason that you late for whatever meeting you got next.
My final thought is this. Again, I think I've kind of already summed it up. It is very imperative that we understand the sources of power and how they play out in this country, and how we leverage and use them on our behalf. Education is a key, most important factor that we can use, in addition to understanding who the power players are. And so, I'm always committed to being able to be an educator and a trainer to other people, and to help them advance. And again, for me, it's always about, I can't do this alone. I don't want to do this alone. So however I can build communities around my mission, my vision, I know that we are stronger together, and I want to work in that capacity. I think, unfortunately, people before us didn't think like that. They're not creating a legacy. Dr. Fuller, you are a legacy. You are creating a legacy. I appreciate the fact that you are passing on the torch of what you have fought for and worked for over the course of your 20, 30 years on to people like me and to people like Dr. Cole. That's important. That's the thing that keeps us moving and keeps us going. So I'm just appreciative to be in this space, especially with someone as brilliant as you two. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. That's awesome. That was very
That's Jay. So look at me, my final word is, man, the virus has not gone away. And I want to encourage our people to be safe now, because the people who are running this country, they don't care about your life. And so I'm saying we got to care about our own life. And don't be fooled that, oh, okay, since Trump decided, whatever the hell he decided, the latest thing he said is that we ought to end testing, because if we end testing, we won't have a virus. That's what this fool actually said. And so what I'm saying to y'all is the virus is still active in America. It's still killing people. And the history of this virus has been disproportionately, it is killing us. And since these people are not going to be trying to take care of us, we got to take care of ourselves. So I'm urging you all to be safe out there, because this virus is still out there killing people.
Appreciate that. For me, look, when I say I'm the reckoning of America, what I mean is, I grew up, I breathe empire air. All of us do, right? You don't live in an empire and not pick up a few things. You saw land you wanted, you took it, and you killed the people that was there. You saw the best, cheapest labor was to have slaves, so you enslaved people. You didn't like the tax that the British put on you. You dumped the tea into the water. And then you got the nerve to tell Black people how to protest. And when they do protest peacefully, you ostracize them. And then you ask, why can't they just be peaceful like that King guy that you killed? Listen, you can't be a good cop and watch bad cops kill Black people or brown people or innocent people and still be a good cop. The same way you can't be a good teacher and watch bad teachers put a proverbial knee on the necks of Black, brown, and poor kids and watch it and do nothing. You can't be a good teacher. This system was not built by us. It was not built by God. It is changeable, and it is time for a reckoning. But you do not get to choose what that reckoning looks like. And sometimes it comes at you really, really fast and punches you in the eye. For Dr. Howard Fuller and J. Artis-Wright, I'm Dr. Charles Cole. Thank you so much for joining us for another session of Howard University. We're halfway through. I'm very sad. I don't want it to end. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot. You can follow Dr. Fuller on Twitter at Howard L. Fuller. You should go do that. You can hashtag Howard's University. Put an S at the end of Howard so we don't get the other Howard. Jay is not really in these Twitter streets yet, but she will be. So when she is, we'll make sure that you have that. And you can catch us here for the next 5 sessions. This is taped, so you can watch it later, but we come back here every single time on Tuesday. So thank you for the folks that showed up for Eventbrite. I hope this was valuable for you. If this gave you any value, please let us know and please share it with folks. I love you, Jay. I love you, Dr. Fuller. People that watched us, I love you. I don't think we tell each other that we love each other enough, because this virus is definitely killing people. So be safe, take care of yourselves, and we will see you next time. Peace.
All right.
And power.
And power.
And power.
And power.